y'all. Welcome to this third episode of the Red Skywalker podcast. I am so grateful to you being here and tuning in to this episode about repair. Good Lordy. We went everywhere during this episode, and also, how could we not? I'm sitting here recording this introduction and thinking to myself about many conversations I've been having with people lately around ways of being in the past that were once relational and rooted in reciprocity and in dialogue and mutual respect, in reverence for the sacredness of one another as human beings and animals and plant and elemental beings. And then how all of that began to shift over time to a culture that instead prioritized hierarchy and dominance and power and control over relationality instead, and how that then influenced our beliefs and ways of being, and we lost that ability to live in harmony and in right relationship in many ways, I feel. And now I look at the powder keg collectively that I see around us in many ways, certainly in the U.S., where now I see a dominant culture that's rooted in oppression and control, and of course has been for a long while, and has impacted everyone at this point, I feel, in terms of developmental and complex trauma. But I share this because to me it's no wonder that so many walk around today like ticking time bombs and don't have the tools to navigate rupture in relationship or to communicate or be in dialogue around interpersonal healing, let alone to deeply address the layers of trauma that are running the show underneath it all. And so that's why we're here exploring this, because the school of the Red Skywalker really aims to deepen our capacity as people to repair our relationship with ourselves and with one another and with spirit and with the living world around us, and to return to that culture of relationality instead of fear and control. And so in this episode, we begin that dialogue about how we can bring the past into the present without recognizing that's what we're doing, and how to be aware of the many low-running or undercurrent energies that are present, the pendulum swinging that we can fall into between perceived right and wrong, and having forgiveness and compassion while also honoring accountability, as well as how to examine our own attachment around how someone meets us in the repair space. And in this episode, I'm joined by my dear sisters, Melissa Seligman and Sheri. The three of us together have had many of our own repair conversations in our relationships with one another, and held space for many a conversation and conflict repair for others in the community that we were all on the leadership team in the startup days when there was a lot of storming and many needs for witnessing and for keeping the fire for those conversations. Sheri has an extensive history that I could share about coaching and culture building, but what I really want to say about her is what an honor it's been to get to know her over the years and watch her heal more and more, and to watch her come home to her own body and just see her become the loving witness and the beacon that she is and has been for so many, but even more now with the continual integration of the pain of her past being incorporated, and to see that love that she radiates become even more vibrant has just been such an honor. And Sister Melissa has just an extensive history of leading organizations and retreats rotating around military trauma for years. She's an author, and she's so much more, and she's always been a healer at heart. In the last 5 years or so, I believe she's been walking with Greg and deepening into that space that has always called to her as a medicine woman and a fire keeper, not just in her soul, but in her lineage. And it's been an honor to see her come more and more full circle in her journey as well. She is a mirror for many, and she's given me the gift of mentoring me in ways of healing and walking with people that I had always yearned for, which is what drew me to healing work in the first place. And that way of really bringing the shadows to light and meeting them with love and helping me understand how trauma is actually the medicine. She's been essential on my path in terms of not only sitting with me in a way that helps me come home to myself, but mentoring me through the years on all things trauma, which has allowed me to sit with people the way that I do one-on-one and in groups. And so I'm eternally grateful to her. And I hope you enjoy spending time with these two. They are wise beings, and I am grateful for you listening to this conversation. Well, I wanted to thank you both so much for being here. My dear friends and sisters and teachers in many ways, Sheri Kay and Melissa Seligman. And, this feels really foundational to the podcast because so much of what we're going to be exploring is around reparation work more collectively and between humans and the earth and cross-culturally and all sorts of other themes between the masculine and the feminine. And so this felt like a really important starting point. We might not get into all of that today, but maybe more focusing on our personal relationship to repair and interpersonal repair in community. And you two have seen me grow and evolve, and I've seen you both grow and evolve in the last 4 years that we've been friends together. I know you two have had relationship with one another before then, but for context, listeners, Melissa and Sheri and I were all on the leadership team, among many others, at Emberlight, the Center for Conscious Living and Dying, starting in 2022, which is how my relationship with them began. Well, it really began with the film a little bit before then, but it was really forged through our work at Emberlight. And I guess I'm naming that just because it was there that I learned so much about repair in my friendship and relationships to you both and our leadership team and as stewards of that community, just seeing how to hold space for people when folks care about something so deeply, care about a community, care about a movement, and thus have so much fear about losing it that we saw time and time again there. And so I wanted to bring you both on because of our experience there and because of everything that I've learned from you both. And just for a little bit of context, the Red Skywalker is all around bridging heaven and earth, or that bird's eye perspective of equanimity and compassion and understanding, and being able to see the bird's eye view of divine order, if you will, and then also bridging that to the nitty gritty, the dirt and the shadow of humanity and what that looks like relationally. And so I feel like repair is an essential part of that conversation. And so that's why we're talking about it. And so I wanted to start, if you'll humor me and if you feel like sharing, what your relationship was to repair that you learned in your family growing up, what your origin story was, if you're willing to share, what you learned about how to navigate repair or how not to navigate repair based on what you saw, not where you are now.
Is it okay if I start, Melissa?
Mhm.
I could feel the smile come across my face because I learned nothing, and you're nothing about repair. Repair was I found out I did something wrong and I was forced to say I was sorry. So I learned a little bit about a forced apology, and as I started to experience what I did not have language for at the time, any guilt, shame, embarrassment, any kind of self-deprecation, like I learned to apologize often for things that even were not my fault. And that really isn't repair, but I did not know that then. And in a nutshell, that's the extent of my repair education growing up.
Oh, this is a good question, Hannah. Yeah, I think I learned negative, like into the not even close to an apology. I think the only apologies that came about were actually probably from me. And similarly, Sheri, like I had to apologize, in order to move into a space of feeling safer for myself. And what I will say about that from a very young age is that I had a clear awareness that I was apologizing, but nobody else was. Like I had a very strong awareness that I'm sorry is about as far as something would go. And it would be in said as an element of defeat. Like, okay, I'm wrong, then I'm sorry. And it would basically have that kind of tone. Like I would get like, I'm sorry, all right. You're like, oh, that that doesn't feel so great. So I did not witness it. I experienced that I needed to do it, but not often, and did not understand at all. Like, half the time I didn't understand what I was apologizing for. because it felt like an undercurrent of some kind of dynamic that I didn't understand between two adults. And that basically, as a child, it was my job to make these two adults feel better about whatever just happened. And I'm not going to get an explanation around that in any way.
I'll also add, now that I understand some about repair, so much of that is about listening to each other and hearing each other and being in dialogue, and the opposite of that growing up, like, can we talk, we are not going to talk about this again, it's over, and everything was sharp and tight, and no discussion about feelings ever, no rehashing. The past is the past. Kind of, I can like hear my dad's voice, like, don't need to talk about that.
Mm-hmm. And you know what I experienced around that, Sherry's, like in a similar way, we're not going to talk about it, but it will also be brought up over and over and over from now on. So there was also this sense of an apology did not end it.
Thank you both for sharing that. And I resonate so much with what each of you are sharing. And for me, in my house, it was very much around, I guess, two things. It kind of boiled down to two dynamics or patterns in terms of what I was seeing between members of my family and specifically my parents. There was this fear of like conflict meant separation, a loss of connection between people. And there was often the silent treatment for weeks or sometimes longer, and just this gradual withdrawal and self-protection that I saw happening, or a threat to the relationship, like outwardly saying, like, I'm leaving, or, this impending doom around the family unit falling apart when there was conflict. And so that was one of the patterns that I saw a lot. And the other was if there were mistakes involved, there was a lot of shame around that. And there was not like there was no accountability modeled. I didn't see what an apology even looked like. I didn't see people having the humility to say, "Oh, this is what I did. Oh, these are my patterns. Here's what I'm contributing to the relationship," and the ability to sit with the harm and the discomfort of that impact. There was just a lot of deflection, of blaming and victimization on both sides, if you were the one harmed or if you're the one contributing the harm in that moment. So, yeah, I really appreciate you both sharing and resonate so deeply with that. And something I wanted to talk a lot about today is, my sense, and so much of this I've learned from you, Melissa, just experientially and in your mentorship, that is the way that trauma impacts our ability to see clearly in the present. Like we're seeing everything through that filtered lens of things that are distorted and our learned adaptations that allowed us to survive. And I've heard you say, yes, those are so brilliant, and they really impact our ability to relate from that grounded place of having our own back, of knowing how to be in right relationship with ourselves, knowing how to be in right relationship with one another and with spirit. And so I wanted to open up the space just to talk about some of the elements that we've talked about, the three of us, because we've talked about repair before, and some of these things like vulnerability and accountability and empathy and changed behavior as examples off the top of my head, boundaries, and how those are really difficult to bring to conversations around repair when you haven't experienced what any of those look like in a healthy way. If you've only experienced the shadow side of those, like the impact of being vulnerable as then punishment or being exploited or manipulated in some way as a kid, how that lives in you, or accountability. If you took accountability, then it meant often shame or blame or whatever the impact of those are. I'd love to just open up if you have anything to share about essentially why healing trauma underneath these things is important so that we can even have the capacity in our nervous systems to navigate repair that many of us don't have. Just that.
Ooh, that no, I was like, that's a big, huge can of question worms. Like, I think I think where I want to go, and then see how this resonates for you too, Sheri. But like this, when you speak to the disconnection or the separation that happens, when there's some kind of rupture, or some kind of perceived conflict that comes forward, I did not have the connection to begin with to feel the disconnection. And so there's an element for me of when I listen to you talk about that separation of the connection and that fear that comes up. I just have so much empathy for that little girl, like being in that space of you were here and now you've left me. And my experience was, well, you're never here, but you try and tell me what to do. I was in a very different little girl space, but just feeling so much empathy for you as a little girl of like having that and then not having that. And I think I want to speak to those moments of silence, because that for me is real where I really started as a little kid wondering what life would be like if we didn't take that much time of silence to hurt someone, or to get some kind of, you did this to me, so I'm going to make you feel this way for this long, because I would go for months, and I mean like 3 months at a time, of hearing the silent treatment, like either getting it, witnessing it, watching it, times where the house was just silent. And with this deep energy of, you did this thing, and so I'm not going to speak to you until I'm finished of feeling this thing, and that is such a confusing space for people. And I think that's really where I started to dive into, why are we wasting time to be with each other in this way? And so where that sent me was over to the other side, where I would try to repair way too soon, before another person was even ready. And that's because I had this element of that silent treatment. Like, I will never go to bed angry. I will not do, so I tried to do the opposite. And when I did the opposite, like, we got to talk through this thing, we've got to work through this thing, that was really my trauma running the show. And then at the end of the day, I'm also dominating and trying to control the other person to force them to get into a vulnerable space to have this connection with me. And so I went from forcing the disconnection to forcing the connection. And so I think the biggest piece that I've learned around that in terms of trauma is that I don't have the capacity to connect on the level that I know is necessary for myself and for another person to feel like it was completely looked at, and that we all both held our parts and pieces, without losing the desire to stay in connection while we do that. And so connection for me became kind of everything, because without it, I don't think we can get to that completion of peaceful contentment with each other and with ourselves, and with right relationship with spirit and ourselves. And if we're having trauma come up from a historical way of being with conflict or perceived conflict, then we have two different dialogues going at the same time. Whether we realize it or not, those dialogues are going at once. And I have not experienced as of yet a way of getting to connective repair while having trauma or triggers show up at the same time. And so for me, the only way to get into connective repair is to get your body safe enough to realize it can connect without any danger. And so to connect without danger means you have to tell your body there is none present, and be in a space of believing that there is none present. And so I think that's often where trauma gets in the way.
Just so much in here. So, Hannah, when you first started talking about the separation that would happen, like the separation from connection, and then Melissa, you start to fill in some of the blanks, and I had a take hand, hit forehead moment of when I was young, I didn't even know what connection was. And I don't know that I ever realized that until just now. And so I think I always felt separate. My nervous system was always running the show. And it wasn't until really literally the last few years, not that I've never had beautiful relationships and I've never felt in connection at all, but now that I've done so much of this work, and so much of it the three of us have done together, and I've done with you, Melissa, knowing the difference between a highly activated traumatic state, traumatized state, and what it is to actually find groundedness. When I look back to my childhood, there was not safeness. Like maybe at moments with this particular teacher or that particular aunt. So it's coming through so clearly on why I didn't understand anything about repair, because I didn't even know what I was trying to repair toward.
That was basically going to be my next question too, Sheri and Melissa, is what is some of the work that you've done? And Melissa, I was grateful you brought up that perceived conflict. That was one of the pieces I wanted to explore today. Is like sometimes I know for myself, and you two have witnessed me in this, I will be experiencing a moment as if it's not safe when it really is. It's like I'm totally seeing it through this lens of through my body's experience of the past that's still deeply wired in my system. And so, what is some of the work, and I can speak to my own experience too, but I'd love to hear from you both since you're here, the work that you've done within yourself to clear out some of those threads that have been so ingrained and activating to your system that feels like threat, that is linked to those adaptations that keeps you from being in calm in your body, the experience of calm in your body, so you can find connection. What does some of that work look like for you both?
This has just been in the past couple years, but I think one of the most powerful things I've ever done is sitting with you, Melissa, and you asking me the question. I want you to go back as far as you can remember and tell me about the different things that have been traumatic for you. Little t, big T, traumatic for you. And it was the first time, number one, that anybody asked me to witness, not just tell one little story and not one little fragment, but that I had an opportunity to go back into my own life. It was a whole life review, and I know I didn't open up every box that was there, but being able to have somebody literally invite and stay with me as I was able to retell the story. I think it was the first time that I ever recognized the magnitude of just how much I had lived through. And the sessions were not absent of shame or embarrassment. The shame and embarrassment was held and honored. It's like no matter what was coming up, it was normalized. It was okay. It was significant, and it played a role in moving more and more and more toward getting into a healing space. So when I hear you say that you can't have repair as long as there's still active trauma going on, like of course I could not move toward repair if I was still in a trigger. I was still holding on, like gripping in my body to try to see if I was safe or not. And that was an intense and powerful introduction to learning.
So much of this is like so many of us are walking around with developmental trauma. Like this is where my mom would say you can't sling a cat without hitting trauma somewhere. Like I mean, there's so many of us out here with developmental trauma and not aware that it was developmental trauma, and also not feeling like we're allowed to own that, because that has to mean, like sex trafficking. Like we all can be like, that's clearly developmental trauma, right? But like we compare and we want to put things in boxes, and we rarely will own our own trauma unless we can point to this big event that happened that we can be like, that was traumatizing. But when we're in a sustained environment where we're questioning our safety for whatever reason, then we're talking about a brain wiring around, I can't be at my basic self here and feel safe. I have to alter myself to feel safe. So then we grow up and have no clue what it means to connect, no idea what it means to be embodied, what it means to be in our body. And we hear these words everywhere and we're like, okay, well, I'm trying, but I have no clue. And honestly, we don't know that we're not grounded, because this is our normal way of functioning. And when you come into that space of this is my normal way of functioning, how are you supposed to compare it to something you've never touched? So like that's the part for me that I love being able to share with people, is be like, you can keep getting mad at yourself because you don't know how to ground, but have you ever had the chance to learn? Like, have you ever felt that in your body? And then when people are like, no, then I'm like, oh, see, that's not actually your fault. So you're not faulty. You just haven't learned this skill yet because you didn't have a chance to learn it when you were growing. So many people have no idea that they're walking around dysregulated to even figure out how to regulate, because they don't know what regulated feels like, and they also they're dysregulated feels normal. That's their baseline. That's so when you ask somebody like, are you grounded or not grounded, and they don't even understand that they're dysregulated, they've just been at their normal functioning, they have no way to go in and feel, no way to feel the sensations. I mean, that's not even, from where I'm sitting, I haven't seen that be possible. So for me, where that kernel began was with Ken Jones. When I had somebody normalize my experience, and then I realized, oh, this is not a Melissa thing. This is a trauma thing. That started me on the journey of wanting to understand, what does that mean now? If I'm experiencing trauma and I'm not just broken Melissa who can't get right, but I'm experiencing trauma, and this man is speaking about trauma and he's saying things about me and he doesn't know me at all, and I'm hearing myself, now I'm going to sit at his feet and be like, how did you learn? So it took me sitting at his feet to understand, how do you begin to move from something you've never known to even understand when you're shifting the feelings within.
Sheri, I know you have things to say. I just want to really briefly say for those who are listening, Ken Jones is Melissa's trauma mentor.
Mhm.
I'm on the edge of my seat because you're speaking to everything that now makes sense to me. And I spent years, I'm a yoga teacher. So I learned about chakras and energy and embodiment. And I could talk the talk because I was reading and I'm studying and I'm getting all of these things intellectually. I know how to ground. I do this breath. But it wasn't until we sat together in so many different configurations that it started to be an embodied experience. And that, I think, is the biggest thing that we've learned together to understand differently. Not from another friend of mine that is a neuroscientist and therapist has always said, you can't heal intellectually what occurred emotionally. And so you were just speaking to that, and I want to make sure that that feels clear for anybody that's listening, the difference between understanding and actually experiencing. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, see, that's the thing, especially if we've had developmental trauma and we dissociated so much in our developmental stages of our brain wiring, there's a very good chance that we have no idea how to tell the difference between thinking and feeling. And we often think about our feelings and feel like we felt them because we were like up here in this space where this is the safe place. And if we stay up here and think through everything and process it and analyze it, that does offer a sense of, okay, the brain has figured this out. Now it can tell the body, I got this, calm down. Except the brain can create whatever story we want, to make sense from that. So it really is a journey to start to help people even pinpoint, oh, I don't know if I'm feeling or if I think I'm feeling, or if I'm just thinking about feeling. And so like easing somebody into their body when they've been mainly dissociated for most of their life is it's no joke. It's a very important process of doing slowly, because if they were to drop down and feel everything they're actually feeling, but they've been dissociated from those feelings, it can be so overwhelming that it's traumatizing.
And you've spoken to that before too, that in a therapeutic setting, in a healing setting, how important it is that somebody is not re-traumatized.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love this conversation so much, and it's it's interesting because we're talking about repair. I'm using air quotes for anyone who's listening and can't see our faces. And yeah, it's so much about just healing in general. It's like how we can't heal our relationships with one another and show up in a good way until we do that work of repairing our relationship with ourselves in many ways. And I know you both have witnessed me in a time, and I spoke to this a little bit in the podcast intro of that probably 10 years of my life where I was deep in spiritual texts, and they were all talking about this is kind of like you were saying, Sheri, with your yoga training and this focus on the chakras and learning up here in the mind, or even in my heart, I would say this idea that everyone is spirit, expressions of spirit, and seeing each one as the light, and the way that that allowed me to bypass so much of my own experience with people, and condone a lot of behavior where I wasn't being respected, and just like overly forgiving, which of course was correlated to programs from my childhood as well, and fawning and all that, and to strive for that connection and retain that connection for whatever I could do to retain that. But I'm sharing all that because so much of my work with you, Melissa, when you started reflecting some of these patterns to me, was about you got to get in right relationship with yourself before you can get in right relationship with these other people. And you got to get in right relationship with spirit and yourself as spirit in order to get in right relationship with other people. And that doesn't always mean forgiving people when you're being disrespected. So I love this conversation because it's all of it. It's self-forgiveness. It's how to not self-abandon, and where that intersection of, our own boundaries needed for our own self-love and care intersect with other people. And something I've heard you say a lot, Melissa, is how much of yourself are you going to give to people, because so much of that is dependent on then how they can meet you in ways that you're being honored. And sometimes that's giving 10% of yourself to someone, sometimes that's 100%. Whereas I used to be like, all of me, you can have all of me. And I was not in integrity with myself. And the other piece I'm hearing in this conversation too is, when I think of the word integrity, is the congruence between mind, body, heart, and soul. And I'm hearing us talk about that a lot today. Are your words matching your energies? Are your behaviors matching? Is everything lined up? And how often, using myself as an example, those people pleasing parts of me where I would be saying one thing, but the energy underneath was running from a very different space. And so I just wanted to open up that conversation too around why that's relevant to repair.
I think when people talk about alignment or they talk about authenticity, for me, that's what that means, is that my actions match my words, match my energy, match my presence, my overall presence. And one of my favorite teachers is my daughter with this one, because I had an awareness not too long ago about how, we have a history, and, there's this history of power dynamics of mother, daughter, and all these things. But I was just like, if there's a place where she's needing an apology from me and I'm over here marking, I can't do this like my parents did it, right? Like, I got to be different. And if I just recall what it was that really, as a kid, and then growing into an adult relationship with them, what really was stirring in me was that their apology wasn't authentic. If it ever happened, if it even happened, it wasn't authentic. And so then I'm over here, like trying to say, I'm so happy for you. But because I have these low running energies of hypervigilance, because we've not had an easy relationship at times. And so when there's contentious energies between us, or between me and anybody, honestly, is like this sense of, how many filters does my intention have to go through energetically in order for everything to line up? And so I was just testing this with myself, but I'm like, if I have hypervigilance running where I'm like, okay, last time I tried to say this happened, so I'm not gonna say that, right? Like, I've got that running. And then if I have another energy running of, I'm afraid we're going to get into an argument, so I'm walking on eggshells, now that energy is running. And then if I also have like, you also did this to me, and I'm until you fix that, that's also running. If I have an intention of, I am so happy for you, and it goes through those energies because they're there and they're present, it can come out like, I'm so happy for you, and that's what she's experiencing, is like this look on my face, this flat tone that doesn't sound happy, but yet the words coming out of my mouth are like, I'm so happy for you. And that's very different than like, I'm so happy for you. It's so when I can empty myself of anything that's from the past in order to meet this present moment. And that doesn't mean forgetting and forgiving, but that does mean that my past energies around what's there, unless I'm willing to say, I still have some past energies that are here, and that's impacting how I'm showing up. But I'm not going to push them aside because I don't want to dishonor that in myself. But I'm going to name them so that you don't have to figure out what it is you're feeling. That when I say, I am so happy for you, and you already know what else you're feeling from me. And that's me being in alignment with what's inside. So it gives people a way to not be hyper vigilant on the other side, to be like, oh, you've named that. That feels true to me. Because this has been named, now we're in this space of we're going to just tell the truth to each other. And I think that's really important, because that's a way of not betraying yourself. If there's still stuff there, we might as well say there's still stuff here and I'm doing my very best, but I still have some stuff here, and I am going to connect with you and get in this sandwich with you, but there's still stuff here, So being able to even name that, because I think people feel like they got to get in a perfect, coherent space for connection. And for me, that's not the case. We can deeply connect as long as we're being in authenticity about what is running in me, like what the energies are. Is that matching? Am I presenting myself in a way where you sit next to me and feel like, yep, that's all there. I feel it. So she's named it all. She's not hiding anything. And I think that's a place to begin.
Maybe the language that I would use for myself, and this has been a powerful teaching for me, is that multiple things are true at the same time. And growing up, it was like, are you happy or are you sad? Are you in grief or are you in, and you're laughing? Like, how does that work? And so accepting exactly what you just said, that there's not a perfect linear place to be. I'm a complex human, you are a complex human, and our complexities are coming together. And the idea of me being in right relationship with myself, honoring all of the different things that are occurring and all the different frames and lenses in which I'm processing and holding and offering out. I was always trying to put myself in this perfect box so that I wouldn't be too much.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's this big, room to breathe and say, all right, maybe perfection is learning to simply honor all that's occurring at the same time without pretending that this isn't or that isn't happening. And then another one of the patterns for me to break through has been, it was always easy for me when there was pain and hurt, suffering, whatever was going on, I would just take all of the responsibility. And that's a teaching that came, Melissa, when you and I were sitting in a fire last year with somebody else before we went and Hannah, I'll let you explain what it means to sit at the fire. When we came together, you're like, I want you to like really sit and think, what are the parts that were yours? What were the parts that were mine to own, take responsibility for, genuinely make amends for, apologize for? But it wasn't all of it, and that was refreshing and freeing, and also helped me be more open to actually repairing.
I think so much of what you're speaking to, Sheri, is around that victimization that I was speaking to in the beginning. Again, I want to get into the nuance of abuse dynamics at some point in this conversation too, but just for now to take accountability myself around how I was enabling some of that behavior. Like, where were my boundaries? So there's always something to be looking at there in terms of that conversation that you're mentioning, Sheri, of our own pieces and parts, our own accountability, what we're allowing, what we're not allowing for. The fire, you mentioned the fire, and maybe I'll let Melissa speak to that, because she was the one keeping the fire for that dialogue around repair and reconnection and conflict. So feel free, Melissa, since you were the one there that day.
Oh my gosh, that just goes in many, many, many different directions. So I think what I will just say about, holding the fire, being at the fire together. Of course, there was a literal fire first. Like that's real. But then there's also the energetic of what the fire represents. So I think the way I would just bring that all the way down kind of across the board is it's a way to get into connection. If we don't know how to get into connection, we all know how to stare at a fire till we feel better. So, like, just to have that elemental presence available, to have that opportunity to listen to the sounds, the smell, to get yourself in a sensory experience of an element, holding the energy of what you're speaking to, and a way to transmute it, like even being able to just put something in the fire and say, this goes with this, and I'm sending it up into smoke. So there are many different ways to do that, and there are many different ways that we've been doing that as a community, whether it's around death care and holding space there, or whether it's around conflict and holding space there. But um, I think what I would just say about that in general is anytime we can get with a fire or with water or with air or with earth, then we're getting additional support.
Yeah.
The piece that I'll add to that is the power of having a fire keeper, somebody to hold the fire, not to advocate for this one or lean into what that, just to hold this neutral space. Even if there's no interjection at all, knowing that there's witness there, for me, it brings about so much comfort and stabilizes anything that is not yet stable. To just have that third person, and sometimes offering an insight where something might be missed, or a blind spot where something might not have been seen. So that's been a precious gift, and something that has been cultivated. I know lots of places everywhere, but in our community, that has been so in service to each one of us that has taken advantage of it.
Well, when it's been so important, especially, when Melissa's talking about both people being dysregulated, when you're just in a spin. I know, like me and my partner, John Michael, when we're in that space together and we're both just spinning, we're just going in circles. Like you need that witness to hold that space to bring you both back in and down. And so it's so important. Um, I know we could talk about the fire at length, and maybe that needs to be its own episode. There are like 8 things I'm hearing in this. I'm like, these could all be their own conversations. But one thing I'm hearing so much about what we're talking about is like the mirroring between healing our relationship with ourselves and how to bring that then into relationships with others. And I'm hearing this quality of self-love. You've both mentioned this already, and you both were speaking a bit about your own paths and the work that you've had to do to cultivate that ability to regulate and see, take the fleece off your eyes and see things more clearly and clean your mirrors. And for me, that's been such a big teaching, and one I have a lot more work to do, and I'm continuing to learn every day. But that ability to fully and deeply grieve, like you said, Melissa, the things that were not our fault, which is so much of what we're carrying. Like to really give ourselves the space and time to feel those things, to grieve those things, to feel it all the way down to our toes,
Mhm.
and to pour love onto ourselves when we look around and realize how many of us are basically navigating through the world as little children unconsciously, and so to pull those threads apart and to pour that love onto ourselves, to be able to cultivate that space of the witness for ourselves in time so that we have the capacity to hold and nurture ourselves when we don't have that fire keeper or that person there is such a gift and such a worthy cause that I hope people who are listening can know it's possible, because I know we've experienced that together, in our own evolution, and to then be able to not carry so much blame and shame around our mistakes, and to see that they're a part of the learning. Like that accountability doesn't have to be so scary. Seeing other people's actions to depersonalize those, which again speaks to that bird's eye perspective of how do we just see those as dynamics, instead of
Mhm.
that the personality traits or something bad, that right, wrong, bad, good energy, is such an important part of this conversation too, I feel, in terms of accountability. And so, yeah, I don't know if either of you have anything to share about your own journey in terms of self-love and some of those pieces and parts, but that's what's bubbling up.
I do. You just shared so many things, and I went like ping, 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 like many different directions in my brain. So one of the things that I see, so first thing I want to come back and say regarding the witness or a person keeping the fire, it's definitely not their job to help regulate, but it is a really important role of being willing to ask the question of, did you just dysregulate, or like, are you regulated, like being able to even reflect that, because we can get in a space of like co-regulation, which I personally do not believe in personally. That's just me, and that's not shaming anybody in any way, but that's just me. And in terms of holding space for trauma and witness, that's a big piece of helping people understand they have within themselves what it takes to make themselves safe. I'm just holding this perimeter for you to make yourself safe within that perimeter. And I think that's an important piece of the witness. That's just a nuance, but it's a big one. And then also, gosh, about self-love, Hannah, I tell you what, because it feels to me like we have such a pendulum swing experience where if I say to somebody, how are you meeting yourself? I experience two things. There's most often there's self-flagellation to the point of like, I'm so disgusting, I can't believe this other person will even sit with me. And what that creates is the other person has to take care of you while you're talking about the hurt you created to the other person, right? So that like takes away from the other person. Then on the other side, there's so much self-forgiveness. It's like, I've forgiven myself. Why do I even need to talk about it? So we either go between like extreme or bypassing when we're talking about self-love. And so I just want to reflect for myself because I was very much of course it's my fault. Everything's my fault. Like I'll just apologize because of course it's my fault, which is an interesting dynamic because I came from as a kid being like, I know this is not my fault. But, somewhere along the way, I did internalize those abuse tactics to myself that, well, everything was always my fault and I'm not trustworthy because I'm seeing that I can't trust myself here. So it must have been my fault. And then I internalized that deeply. So I was not willing to forgive myself because forgiving myself meant that I hadn't punished myself enough for hurting someone else. And so I think we're all, as humans, just kind of walking around with pretty good hearts in general. We're all trying. I think as soon as we start to separate ourselves in any way from the other person, however they're responding and being like, okay, well, I'm not going to do that, then we're separating ourselves and trying to put ourselves in a category where we feel safe. And so for me, so much self-love has meant I take accountability, but I'm not the sacrificial lamb. I speak to the impact, but I can also speak to my intention and who I am as a person. I can own the impact. And I can also understand I didn't mean to do that. Like all those could be there. And those aren't necessarily things that I need to express. Like I don't need to be like, I'm so sorry for this impact. And I didn't mean to, because now it's a pendulum swing, right? On both sides. So for me, self-love has meant what does accountability mean versus responsibility? And then also, what does self-love mean versus bypassing? And self-forgiveness versus bypassing. So that gave me the freedom to be able to apologize for the impact and to also realize I'm still a good person. And I can speak to that impact and love you instead of making you love me while I beat myself up.
Wow, thank you for all of that. This is a giant game of popcorn, and I'm not ever sure which kernels to to pull down. Where I went with this in response to what you were just saying, Melissa, is the journey between self-deprecation and bypassing. And so many times there's been conversations about self-love and I would just literally like put my hand over my face and put my head down because I was never a person that had the ability to speak about self-love. I was either on one end of the pendulum or the other. And so the road has been a really sweet walk. Started with a lot of self-forgiveness, recognizing that so many of the traumatic events that I learned to speak to openly with you were not things that were my fault. And that was a big deal. I can feel it like tightening in my throat and my eyes tearing up just saying that out loud. Like the things that happened to me were not my fault. And again, repeating, it's different for me to say the words and feel it and know it in my head and then let myself actually take it in my body. So a second ago, I felt it in my throat, and now I can feel it in my heart, and it just made its way all the way down into my belly. So there's a lot in there for me. And then there's just, when can I have grace for myself? And letting go of the threads and the ropes of imperfection. be not just okay but necessary. Like I'm kind of glad when I screw something up right now and I can learn to laugh at myself and say, oh my, I did that again, or I can't remember something. I'm not beating myself up. It's like, oh, I forgot. I'll either remember in a minute or I'll ask somebody else to help. Learning to ask for help and starting to let go of the grips of hypervigilance and hyper independence. So part of that idea of connection comes from me being open to actually want to put my hands out and say, will you be here for me like I have wanted to be here for you? So it's such a big walk, recognizing when shame comes up and honoring it instead of trying to stuff it. And there's just so many cobblestones on the road to create this bridge in between that self-flagellance, that self-deprecation, and not acknowledging it at all. And I don't know if it's a journey that's ever completed. I really don't. Hannah and I were talking before the call started. Like, I knew there was an onion, but I didn't know it was as big as the globe to keep unpeeling over and over and over again. What I do know is I can sit in my body and look in the mirror now and say, I really, really, really like you. And sometimes I can say, I love you. And that still feels like a little bit of a stretch, but it is a million miles away from where I was just a couple years ago.
I hear so much in that, Sheri, of honoring like that journey. And most I've heard you talk about the marble jar before that I've heard you say, and I know Brene Brown speaks to as well. Just that journey of honoring where you are in any given moment and honoring your own capacity, and something that's, again, this is a hilarious conversation because it's so all over the place. Like there's so much here. But what's coming up for me in this moment, and I apologize if this is taking us down another road that we weren't going on, or Melissa, if you had something else to share, but on this topic of capacity and honoring where each person is, I wanted to put in the soup, what about those times when someone just doesn't have the capacity to meet us in what we're needing to feel respected and cared for and met in those ways that like we've learned to meet ourselves, and change behavior. What if someone cannot or is not willing to change behavior in the ways that we're asking for in order to be in relationship with this person? And how does that maybe relate to empathy?
Hmm. Okay. Let me see. Where did we go? Where did we go? There was change behavior was one, empathy another, and then what was the first one?
And capacity, I guess, as it relates to change behavior.
Capacity. Yeah, yeah. So I think the first place to begin when it comes to a repair conversation, other than the connection, like that's moving into the repair conversation, right? But even just the intention of the repair conversation really rotates around looking at the attachment and the expectation of what it's going to be like after this conversation. The the biggest work I find in conflict resolution, especially between two people, is that they both come in with an expectation, and very rarely, if ever, is that expectation ever met. And then they walk away and they're like, "But I didn't feel that." I'm like, "Well, did you say you wanted to feel that? Like, was there like a sitting there and saying, when this is complete, I would like to feel this way?" And then they're like, "No, I just assumed." And I'm like, "Well, here we are." Like if you want something to occur, speak to that want, which will give the other person an opportunity to speak to whether or not they want to meet you in that want. And that's an important space. And my experience, especially with like looking at my parents and doing a lot of repair work for myself with my own family that is not involved in that repair work. Like they can step in here and there, but it's more like it's being offered instead of they're creating it. And my exhaustion came from continuing to try to create open space for us to have repair. And then them not having the capacity to meet it. And then me being like, well, what's the point? Just like getting really angry because then I'm still doing the same thing I've always done, which is overextend myself into their capacity to try to give them the capacity through all kinds of modalities or information or processes, or, all these things. And so it was my teacher, Greg, who actually said to me, But I was talking about doing this work with my mom specifically. I am from southeastern Kentucky. Sometimes it's hard to tell until you put me next to a southeastern Kentucky person, and then it's clear. But one of the things he said to me is, "You're from Kentucky. You of all people should know better than to corner a wounded bobcat." And that lifted a lot of things for me. It made a lot of sense. And so then I was like, well, if I'm going to do repair work with my family, and my mom, for all intents and purposes, is a wounded bobcat that I understand, how do we get there before she dies? Because we have a lot of unresolved pieces here. And he was very clear. He was like, you do that work in the non local. And so I think that that's an important thing to consider, is that, are we actually doing it on our own, even if they don't have capacity to meet us at this place? Or is there a way to have allyship in that? And of course, there's ways to have allyship in that, but it's like my expectation is that it needs to come out of her mouth, and I need to hear these words. And until I could sit down and realize, do I actually need to hear these words, or is that an expectation? Is that an attachment? Do I have the capacity at the point that I'm saying she doesn't have capacity? Do I have the capacity to be in that space and not need a single thing from her? Still be able to speak my truth however I need to speak it. But does she actually need to be the one to witness it? No, because she can't. And so moving into that space of doing non-local work, which was more energetic than anything, really gave me a pathway to understand that I'm not always going to have people who want repair with me. And that's a big thing that we have to sit with, is that when things happen, and especially when I have caused pain or hurt, there's still a few people from my childhood that I have desperately tried to reach out to, and they've been clear that that's not an option. And so then what does it mean? They don't have that capacity or the desire or the want. How do I sit then with my own accountability of, but I know I hurt you and I can't get the apology out of me to you? And so that also means non-local work as well. And again, removing the attachment. The expectation that repair means perfectly skipping off after the conversation has to really be looked at, because for some people, they may be very clear that they're like, I might listen to you, but I'm not capable of doing this. And that's important to be okay with, and be able to meet that.
Do you think I want to say it seems like it would be normal for everybody, but I'll just speak for myself that I did have an expectation that I never even knew that I had of this was the way to do it. It had to be, we both had to sit together. We both had to look into each other's eyes. You have to listen to me. I have to listen to you. I have things to say. And then I can breathe and I can have some relief. And so when you talk about non-local, I always knew that healing was possible even without the other person being there. But again, that was an intellectual idea, not an actual belief. And so now learning how to be in right relationship with the other person by being in right relationship with myself actually makes sense. Do I actually need them to forgive me? No, I can forgive myself. And what is it that Greg says? I love you enough to have that there's nothing to forgive.
There's Forgiveness feels like nothing. That's one of the things that he says, which took me a little while to understand for myself. Forgiveness feels like nothing in my body is alive. So that's one. And then the other one is, I love you so much, I don't care.
And it's so wise. The other day, I think I started to tell you about this, Hannah. Something happened, and I had this moment. It's not integrated fully, so I'm not walking around with an embodied experience of this. But no matter what hurt comes to me, or happens, or I experience, I can mend it right here. I can mend it in my heart. I can mend it in prayer. And it's all just the gyrations that I'm creating in my own mind and in my own body that get in the way of my ability to soften and find that self-compassion and find that grace. And then there's the idea of letting go of the righteousness and letting go of the victimization. So there's this like taking in a flow of grace while I'm letting go of all of the egoic pieces of it. And the way I'm saying it, it sounds so easy. It's not.
I love it so much because you're speaking to exactly why the way the Red Skywalker brings forward these conversations of the ability to hold both. It's like, how do we hold and inherit the truth of who we are as deeply powerful and infinite beings by not bypassing, by allowing ourselves to touch our humanity, and it's the juice, it's everything. And so my next question is, because so many of the people who are drawn to this work and who may be listening are healers or people who are in leadership spaces or stewards of communities or those who are called to build communities and be a part of that web, so many people right now are drawn to this work of scooping themselves out so they can be clear enough to receive spirit, right? To receive whatever energies are needing to come through to create a new old way of being, whatever is emerging right now. My question to you is, can you both speak to what I've heard you call, Melissa, bringing abuse tactics to the healing space, what people can pay attention to as healers and leaders who are holding space for people, how they can do that work more responsibly and not cause harm by basically not shining a light on the shadow of their shadow.
Mm. Mm. Ooh, good question. Okay. The first thing that I'll say about not bringing abuse tactics to the healing space is people really get cringy when I use that statement. And that's because so many of us come from abuse and we have been perpetrated upon. And so then for us to be like, you're saying I'm using abuse tactics, but you don't seem to understand I'm the victim here. And so it is a statement that I understand is going to bring forward a lot of feelings. And it's definitely a statement I won't change for that reason. It's because it is going to cause things to surface to hear someone, especially, for myself, I do come from an abuse background. Like I am here to be able to say, yes, I was a victim of that. What is incredibly important is for me also say I was also a perpetrator of that, because what we learn gets internalized no matter what we're doing, and that's not our fault. Like it is not my fault that I played out what I saw over and over again. It only becomes my fault when I choose to do it again knowingly. And that's a place where I can be with it. Like I can be with it there, and that's a place where I feel like I can solidly stand and say, okay, I am aware that this is part of me, and how I meet this part is going to mean everything for how I continue to move. And so when I say bringing abuse tactics to the healing space, I mean, as a kid, especially if we're experiencing abuse or if there's a prolonged abuse anywhere beyond kid to adult, like just in general, if we've had a prolonged experience of abuse in some way, and I'm throwing them all in there, like it's not just physical, it's energetic, it's spiritual, like all those things. If it, and I don't see how any of us can, at this point, could say that we're not a victim of abuse based on how our society functions. So, just in general, I think we can all say we understand and have experienced abuse based on the systems, based on where we fall socially, economically, like, where we are in terms of race culture and racism culture, like all these things. I think we all can touch some of it. Some of us can touch it deeper, some of us touch it broader, but we can't at this point in our society say we're not touched. And so to bring abuse tactics into a healing space means to me that we have learned to alter ourselves in order to get a different result. And usually in the beginning, if we're altering ourselves to get a different result, it rotates around safety. It rotates around feeling life or death. I have to do this to feel safe enough to continue living in this dynamic. When we get out of that dynamic, we have a tendency to be like, it's over. Like everything's out, everything's gone. I've left. And that's a huge place. That's a huge place to be. I've left all of that behind me. This does not define me. This is not who I am. But we often forget that the body keeps the score. And we often forget that those things can shoot right out of us without us even realizing it. So, in terms of even if we're in a space where we've hurt someone, and we want to change that, we might revert to being a little manipulative. That might, sound like, I am so sorry. Can you please forgive me? Please forgive me. Please forgive me. Like, after a while, when you're pushing that, you've got to forgive me, the other person's just like, okay, you're, so that is a push energy. That is a manipulative energy. That is a controlling energy. And we often don't want to admit, oh, that's me too. I was a victim of this, but also I learned how to respond to that system, and I'm still running that system. And so until we can clear that out, this goes back to your first question around trauma. Like, if trauma is showing up, or if any of my old way of functioning is showing up for me to try to get through it, if I'm feeling discomfort and I want to feel a little bit better, will I like kind of tip the scales to put my finger on the scale to make it feel a little better? Those are moments that will get in the way of connection, because people can feel that and people will respond to that. Especially for me, my experience has been when somebody, like, just to use my husband and I as an example, he is someone who's in extreme discomfort when he hurts someone, extreme discomfort. And used to would almost chase me down and be like knocking on the door. I'd be like, I need a few minutes of separation, or I'm going to seriously bring some abuse tactics to this. If you can't give me the space I need, I'm going to respond. So give me the space. But they'd be like knocking on the door, or like, I made you this food. Here's this really healthy smoothie, where I really do want the smoothie. But at the same time, I'm like, I can feel you're trying to make this better without giving me permission to feel it until I'm finished. So that's what I mean by that. And I think it's a very important place to experience. But I can't tell you how many people have said to me, do you have to call it abuse tactics? And I'm like, 100%. Yes. For that reason.
It's interesting. As you're talking, Melissa, I'm thinking about a relationship I have with a friend now, and we're in a bit of separation, just trying to still navigate through some repair work, and we're not through to the other side of it yet. And I find myself still hesitant to reach out because my body is still telling me that there's a hook somewhere. I'm not quite sure yet what I want. I'm not quite sure yet what I have to offer. And what I'm loving is how much I can now feel in my body, like where there's tension, where there's tightness, where there's openness. And until I feel clear and open all the way through, I won't reach out. So the idea of learning patience, because coming from anxious attachment style, like I'm gonna be that. My history is to be that graspy person, and it's getting easier and easier to notice as soon as there's a grasp coming up, and then I just take a couple of breaths and say, "Oh, my body's telling me I'm not quite ready yet." And I love that you mentioned the body keeps the score. Another one that I read 100 years ago but didn't really understand at all. So going back through it again is so helpful in understanding the language of my body. And what is it saying to me? And can I calm enough, slow enough, and be intentional enough to actually listen to what it's telling me? Because more and more, I believe that the answer to almost any question that I have about being in right relationship or moving forward, I can trust my body to give me the answer.
Mm-hmm.
I could never do that before. All the answers were in my head.
Mm-hmm. Well, the body becomes like such a barometer, especially when it's allowed to just be at its normal homeostasis state. It is such a barometer in terms of energetic perception, and such an ally. Like, it's the one we often cut off the quickest because so much trauma happens to the body, and to be in there to witness that trauma is just too much sometimes until we can find a witness to help us do that work. But one extra piece that I'll just offer in terms of that, not reaching out until you feel clean. I think it's also totally beautiful to reach out and say, hey, I'm doing my work to get clean enough to reach out to you, but I just want you to know you're still on my heart, you're still on my mind. And this is where I am in the process so that I can meet you well.
I love that.
That's such a connective space. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, y'all. Thank you for your wisdom. And yeah, I just want to name to anyone who's listening, Melissa, that was something I heard you say recently as you've been shining a light on some of those patterns for me. Like so much of what we talked about, I relate to myself, the pendulum swing from totally bypassing myself and forgiving everybody to then being like, that ain't me, the separation energy of the abuse tactics to the more balanced state in the middle of being able to clearly say these are my pieces and parts, these aren't. And
Mhm.
Melissa, the way you in particular, I mean, both of you have been such mirrors for me, but you especially, Melissa, recently about seeing the underbelly of being nice, versus kind. And that's why I wanted to ask that question, because I think so many people who are healers or, stewards of communities, have such big hearts, and also I feel it's everyone's responsibility to really look at the nuance of where are each of our actions coming from, where are our words really coming from. And what you were sharing, Sheri, feels so true, that we can feel it in our body. The body doesn't lie, the energy doesn't lie, and it is possible. It is possible to get there. And I'm so grateful to both of you for being a part of my journey and having all the grace with me that you have every step along the way. It's been beautiful to see how those pieces and parts of me have been shifting, and to also see where I have so much room to grow. And I think I just wanted to say it's such a blessing to have friendships where there is that capacity to know that love is still there, that willingness to, these are the promises I'm making to shift these things, even when it's uncomfortable, Melissa, of the parts that are icky to claim, and getting really honest with that grit of where am I still benefiting from making those same choices, and really taking ownership and accountability of the conscious ways we do that and the unconscious ways we do that, because we care that much. And I feel like that's what we're all being asked to do right now, is really deeply dig in and level up in that way. And you two are such teachers for me in that regard, and I love you dearly, and I'm so grateful for your vulnerability in this time, and your sisterhood and all of your wisdom and experience. And so before we close, I just am curious if you have anything else that you want to share that's on your heart with people while they get to be with you in this space.
I would say that the biggest piece that I would want to share is that a lot of times when people are thinking about repair, when they're thinking about connection or apology or anything like that, there's such a right wrong energy that can show up, and such self judgment that can show up. And when we're doing this work of looking at, like what you're speaking to, Hannah, of looking at what is keeping me in the pattern, because when we're aware of it and we know we're doing it, but then we still employ it, there's a shadow piece there to look at of, I'm getting some kind of benefit or some kind of release or some kind of something here that makes me not want to stop or confront the pattern. And that can be such a place where people really can get judgmental, of self, of other people, or, and I think what I just want to reiterate over and over again, anytime I'm ever invited into your space for this conversation, is to just say shadow work does not mean negative work. It does not mean bad parts of yourself. It does not mean shame. Shame is probably going to be there because shame originated from probably somebody shaming you for having a behavior that was an adaptive behavior to try to keep living. So it's really important as we're having these conversations to not have them here and there, but to incorporate them into every dialogue we're having so that we can normalize them and be like, you're just looking at your whole self. And there's nothing more beautiful to me than that. And so it's very, it's just, it's on my heart to really want to get out there as a message of, this is not negative. This is not bad behavior. This is not maladaptive people. This is not a broken person. This is not even, I'll go as far as to say this is not even an abusive person. This is a situation that has gone on to the point of a habit, and that's all we're talking about, at that point. And the other thing that I'll add is that the body doesn't lie in terms of energy, but when we invite our brain to interpret it, we're in a whole different world. And with trauma, the response from the brain to the body it's an instant. So we also need a huge pot of self-forgiveness to dump into after that, where we're like, okay, again, this is not a Hannah thing. This is not a Melissa thing. This is not a Sheri thing. This is a trauma thing. And the more we can all collectively start looking at things that way, then we are not separate in looking at the soup. And I think that would be probably forever where my soapbox is. Shadow work is not about negativity.
That was so beautifully said. I almost don't want to add anything because I don't want.
You
It just
add.
it felt so fully encompassed and all so true. Um, I guess if I was going to add anything to come from my own personal experience, is that everything for me has begun with self awareness and recognizing how hard it was and how important it is that I made the decision to not be in this alone. So looking for, seeking for, accepting, and learning then to like actually ask for help when I want it and when I need it is the most important thing I think I've ever done for myself. Because trying to do this alone was futile at best. And so to be part of this family, this sangha, this group of people that are really committed to loving each other, loving ourselves, and I'll just say it again, being in right relationship with ourselves so that we can be in right relationship with others feels like the most significant thing I could ever do, and any of us could ever do. Thank you so much, Hannah.
Thank you for taking the time and for being here and sharing vulnerably, and more to come. Thank you all for listening. If you're interested in joining Sheri, Melissa, and me in the upcoming community conversation to be in dialogue and ask questions about these themes or offer reflections, register at redskywalker.school. You'll also find links there to join the Red Skywalker community called Heart of the Fire, the monthly community gathering space, as well as other ways to work together one-on-one if you feel called to do some of this healing work with me intimately or in groups like Coming Home, where we work in depth with repair. So I hope to see you soon in one of those places or all of those spaces. And until next time.
Hope is what brought me to you. Hope is the car that brings us home. Hope.